Hello everyone, I'm really sorry that I can't be with you today, but I am delighted to be able to share some thoughts on why it really matters that we create AI today that works for you tomorrow. Because certainly for me, I don't know about others, when I think about responsible AI, I think about responsible AI being our requirement for the future. It's no use as doing things like we made a mess of the climate. We have to put that right. So we have a point now where we can actually include young people in our concerns about how AI works out in the coming century. So that's what I want to talk to you about today. And I'm really delighted that you've bothered to listen to me. So moving forward with my PowerPoint, if I can. I don't think I can at the moment. Don't know why. Let's see down here, maybe. Yes, there we are. So technology didn't defeat me. I wanted to share the agenda, a little bit about me. I want to talk about what AI is because I think there's a lot of myth about that. What's responsible AI? How to think about using AI, governance and regulation that's out there and that you should be having a say in. And then finally, really designing the 21st century for the people on the planet of not just today or tomorrow, but also the people of the 2090s. And one of the reasons that the people of the 2090s is really important is that 2090 is the time when many scholars say we will have superintelligence. Now, superintelligence is sort of AI that basically can outthink every person on the planet and is just one large mind in brackets, which brings me to the second thing that I think it's useful for you to know, which is that although computers will be able to apparently show empathy, certainly until we get to artificial general intelligence, they won't be showing empathy. And it's probably true that computers will never be able to show empathy because they're not human, and however much they can read us and judge our emotions and therefore show empathy, they simply can't because they have no idea what empathy is. All they're doing is complex mathematical calculations to work out how you feel. So bear that in mind as we go through talking about artificial intelligence. So to the next slide, that little bit about me. As my background, I'm not an AI scientist. I'm actually a lawyer. I'm a wig and gown English lawyer. And I came to artificial intelligence in a slightly circuitous way. Because my practice as a lawyer had been around human rights and children. And those were where my passion was. And I had to do other things in law to pay the bills, but that's where I wanted to concentrate. And so I got to thinking about AI, human trafficking, how we could use AI to follow traffickers, and also before Westworld, whether we would get to a point where we didn't need to abuse people anymore in human trafficking because we had humanoid robots. And so I've been thinking about AI for a long time. I think I would date it from my first reading of Ray Kurzweil's The Singularity is Near. And then developed much more interest. Was fortunate to be a professor at the time, so I was able to really think deeply about AI and international relations, AI and law, and very much the sort of thing I do now. And, you know, I am really passionate about what we do. We really should have started talking about responsible AI earlier than we did. We didn't really start until 2014 in a cohesive way, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And still, the right people are not talking about the right things in artificial intelligence. So there's lots of work for me and you to do as we move forward. And then I suppose the other piece is that, you know, I have a vision where we can live well with AI, but it's going to require a lot of change. And we are utterly divided, it seems, about whether by 2065 we will have created a whole lot of jobs that we never knew we could do, or by 2065 AI and robots enabled with AI will be doing all of the jobs, and we'll be sitting at home being humans and working out what that actually means for us. So it's truly hard to know what the future looks like. And so we've been doing some work with economists, sci-fi writers, business, governments, and civil society to really think through, what do we want our future to look like? And that's the question you should be asking yourself. What do you want your future to look like? And how can we build policy, and how can you be part of building policy to get us to that future? So moving on, let me tell you a little bit about what is AI. The algorithm is a series of instructions for performing a calculation. I talked about it being very good at math or solving a problem, especially with a computer. As they form the basis of everything that we call AI, they are fundamental to all AI systems. AI is systems designed by humans that are given a complex goal, act in the physical or digital world by perceiving their environment, interpreting the collected structure or unstructured data, reasoning based on the knowledge derived from this data, and deciding the best actions to take. But we define parameters for them before we set them off. And so we're creating a goal, predefining parameters, and then feeding in data to allow the algorithm to reason over the problem. So all AI systems can be designed to learn, to adapt their behavior by analyzing how the environment is affected by their previous actions. And you may have seen that DeepMind has just taught its AI to code and to create new code. And it's saying that that's as good as 56% of human coders out there. So that is an AI that's learning in its environment. And current AI techniques include machine learning, of course, which deep learning, reinforcement learning are part of, machine reasoning, robotics, and probably, if you want to really dig in, see the European Commissioner's high-level group, expert group on AI for their definitions. And also, I would suggest that anybody who is interested and has good mathematical skills take a Coursera course on this. Knowing how it works is very, very important when you're thinking about policy. So let's move on to the fact that in the future, every company will become an AI company. Why is that important? Well, it's important for you because you're all going to be working for these companies. And so you need to be thinking at how you as a young employee fit into this. And you need to be looking for a company that's thought this through, because as you will see, McKinsey says a lot of companies are still absolutely in the dark about the fact that they are becoming AI companies first. And so when you're looking for a job, whether you go and you're working in the healthcare company, actually all the back systems are going to be AI. Probably the system that hired you will be AI, and you'll be using AI in drug discovery or in provision of healthcare. So you need to be making sure that the company you join has the right attitude towards using AI. That's one of the most important things you can do. Vote with your feet. So why did we come up with this thing called responsible AI? Well, we'd all been thinking about it, and we've been seeing the birth of new things like deep learning. And right back in 2014, DeepMind sold itself to Google and said it wouldn't complete the sale without the creation of an ethics advisory panel. That was the first ethics advisory panel, and it really drew attention to the fact that these researchers really thought that they were going to be doing something that required oversight. Professor Hawken, Professor Bostrom, and Professor Russell and Professor Tegmark got together and wrote this article in the Times of London saying that AI could be the best thing we ever do as humans, or it could be the last thing that we do. And so obviously that was something that really sort of rang a bell in everybody's head. And so the IEEE started work on ethically aligned design, and I was privileged to be invited to be its vice chair. We then went to Asilomar in 2017 to design the world's first AI principles. I think we came up with 94, but everybody's honed them down a bit since then. But now there are a lot of people, and rightly so, thinking about responsible or trustworthy AI, whatever you want to call it. Indeed, 190 different organizations all around the world have created ethical principles. And what I think is really valuable for us as humans, and you taking this forward and thinking about how this works in the global context, is that actually we do, as humans, commonly believe in these things that you see on the screen now: diversity and inclusion, reliability and robustness and security, human agency, beneficial AI, data privacy, fairness, explainability, transparency, safety, and accountability. So, you know, we could call it responsible or trustworthy AI, or we could just say these are problems that you will have as you use AI, and they're problems that you have to solve. And you shouldn't be using AI if you're not at least attempting, and it's hard to solve these issues. So looking at the future, PwC predicted that AI would generate $15.7 trillion of value by 2030, but there'd also be decreasing deployment of AI. So what that means is that companies that have already deployed AI are growing and growing in wealth, as you can see, and companies that have not deployed AI are actually finding it really hard, often because of a labor shortage or because they simply don't know where to start. And then Gartner predicted that through 2022, 85% of AI projects would deliver erroneous outcomes due to bias in data, algorithms, and the teams responsible for managing them. And I'll talk a bit about bias later. well, on the what can you do section of this speech, but it is one of the biggest problems that we're encountering at the moment, and it, as bias has always done, unfairly affects minorities, unfairly affects people who haven't had a chance before, and that gets coded in to the algorithm unless you're very careful. And if you think about some of those things that we had, if I just go back, you've got the data privacy and fairness. So if you're going to be very precise about data privacy, you aren't going to share any of a person's data. So that means that when you come to fairness, you can't check your algorithm to see whether it has fairly identified candidates from all different postal districts, for example. But unless you have worked really hard to debias your algorithm, then the fact that a person comes from a specific postcode is actually going to trigger a bias in the algorithm. So this stuff's really hard. And so let me go back. Oh, I will just go back to one of those problems for bias. Only 22% of AI professionals globally are women. And there are really very, very few people from the global south, apart from India, who are working in AI, either in the global south or the global north. And so that means that we have race problems as well as gender problems in AI, all contributing to bias. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about what our platform at the World Economic Forum does. We promote responsible AI to achieve policy innovation. So how do we create responsible foundations to policy so that we can use AI for all the beneficial purposes that we know it can be used for? How do we help businesses create responsible AI foundations so that they can use AI in their businesses? How do we think about social impact, using AI to solve some of those big challenges in the world? First of all, you need a responsible AI foundation, because otherwise you might be causing yourself more problems than you're actually solving. And then we need to think, as I said earlier, about what does a positive future look like for us, because we certainly don't want it to look like Black Mirror. So that said, we created something called the Global AI Action Alliance, which is a sort of tent into which all the best ideas from all around the globe can flow, so that we can learn from one another and not keep reinventing the wheel, which we're in danger of doing in this space at the moment. And if you want to know more, and if you want to know what role you can play in this, then I definitely suggest reading about it, reading some use cases, picking up a toolkit, maybe picking up the toolkit about facial recognition technology and its use by law enforcement, which is one of the most thorny issues around AI today. So I wanted to tell you that the world is actually thinking about governance. And although I've got a big G here, it's usually I usually think of it as a small g. But in the UK, New Zealand, India, Singapore, Rwanda, IADB, and France, just to name the people who have actually worked with us at the forum, there is soft law, so soft AI governance happening. And I particularly want to call out the chatbots for healthcare, because a global shaper has been particularly important in that piece of work. And we always want to have people from the community in our work if you want to join us. So moving on to the actual international governance, all these institutions led by countries mainly. There's also a partnership on AI, which is actually a business-led organization with some nonprofits and academic institutions in it. I wanted to call out specifically Cedric O, who is the IT Minister of France. He and I were at a conference not so long ago, just before Christmas, and he said that AI, in his view, was likely to kill democracy unless we did something about it. That's a very big statement, but I actually agree with him. We have to do something about getting control of the way that these algorithms are used, because otherwise we are going to find that we don't know as humans what's created by people and what's created by algorithms, what's real and what's fake. And as Professor Russell says, we as humans actually haven't reached the level of development where we can exist in a world where we don't know whether we can trust what we hear, what we see. And so we are effectively going blind into new digital situations. After all, you don't even know whether I'm real. So the EU has actually taken a stand and is the first regional group that has decided to create policy around AI. There isn't an act yet, but there is likely to be probably this year. And you'll see that this subliminal, manipulative and exploitative systems that can cause harm like deepfakes, for example, are considered to be unacceptable AI risks by the Europeans. But we don't know what that means quite yet. And we know, for example, that AI nudging you to go for a run or a walk or to get up and stretch is actually good for you. So when does nudging become manipulation and therefore become unacceptable? There are some big issues for us still to get our heads around. And then limited or minimal risk AI systems like chatbots. I think it depends upon the application. You know, we've been talking about chatbots in healthcare. I do think that that is a significant risk in the way that we use AI. We must get it right. We've got people's lives at stake. So lots more for you to think about. And also, as you'll know, GDPR exists in Europe. And so anything that doesn't fall within the AI Act will be picked up by GDPR in its current form. So moving on to every aspect of your life. These are all projects that we're working on at the moment or have worked on at the forum. But from the youngest person, the Smart Toy Awards, where we give awards to toys that are educational and creative and do not bring biases and take children's privacy and are clear about what their intention and what they do and what they're teaching. Because, you know, children under 7 are very, very capable of manipulation. And so what we want is to make sure that we aren't putting highly devices that are very capable of manipulating people in the hands of young children who have yet to form their values. AI and aging, I'm old and I fully expect to be looked after by some form of robotic carer as I get to the point where I can't look after myself. So we are going to see care from the very youngest to the very oldest being given by AI. And also obviously in our hospitals and outside our hospitals, where people simply don't have access to hospitals or doctors. So in that you can see the good and the bad. Isn't it wonderful that we might be able to provide triage by a chatbot for people who can't access a doctor, so that at least they know what to do, and at least they know whether to go and try and find a doctor or find a hospital. That's a huge step forward. We can do such great things provided we have that responsible foundation. And then something like human-centered AI for human resources. This is another one that could be great, because we could fairly and in an unbiased way give people opportunities in the workplace. But if we get it wrong, we are not only not giving people opportunities, but we are taking away the opportunity of change, because AI can't transcend its historical data. We can. So if you've got an AI hiring manager, it's going to be stuck with its historical data and with its decisions based upon that, unless you do something about it. Whereas with a human being, we can actually change. We can say, it's not right for us not to hire people from the African American community. So we will hire someone from that community. So as you can see, there's huge potential, but we have to get it right. We have to get it right. So I wanted, for those of you who are based in the United States, just to mention that it's often said that we have no legislation in the United States, and we're not likely to get any legislation. But actually 14 states have enacted or have pending legislation on AI since 2019. And they're in these areas, and you'll see that future of work and AI hiring coming up. You'll see that transparency about government procurement of AI systems, which we worked on right from the very start at the forum. You'll see bias and, fortunately, in curriculum, we need to ensure that people, everybody, understand basics of AI. Only with that level of knowledge can we make good legislation, can we make good policy, can we make good choices for our children, can we make good choices for ourselves. We have to ensure that everybody understands AI, understands the issues and the benefits, and understands how AI is created. So I'm all for teaching, including it in the curriculum, but I'm not all for saying we need to dash forward with STEM. We have to have the arts in there, because many of you, if it turns out that 2065 is when you're all sitting there thinking about what it is to be human, then probably having learnt something, some arts, some liberal arts in there will be really useful to you. So I want to just mention how we think about engineering trust. We have to have good design, good development, and good use. So right from the moment an algorithm or an AI system is being designed, you have to think about responsible use. You have to think about responsible use as it's developed at every stage. You have to think about responsible use as it is sent out into the market. And you have to think about when you need to kill this particular algorithm because it's no longer fit for purpose. So it's every stage. And one of the reasons that we so much talk about needing diverse teams to be in the creation of these algorithms is because everybody brings their own prejudices. And so your engineers bring prejudices based upon their education, their training, and their own personalities. And so do the social scientists. But we need to put them all together so that we have a true representation of the people who are going to be using the algorithmic system that we have created. So in conclusion, I want to say, this is your future. I'm doing my best because I believe in it passionately that we have to hand responsible AI and all the benefits that come from AI to you and to your children and beyond. And I was posed 2 questions. How can AI narrow equity gaps as opposed to exacerbate them? Well, we've talked about bias, and we actually know that we can exacerbate them or we can narrow them. It depends upon how we think about the design and what steps we take to make sure that we produce algorithms that don't show these biases. We can also try to ensure that everybody gets a fair shot at life. And I really feel that, one of the places that worries me is that we are seeing the people who are wealthy in the United States and the people who are not do this, but we're also seeing it in the world. And when I look at AI, I'm seeing exactly the same thing. I'm seeing those people who have an understanding of AI pulling away from those who don't, and the global north, which is using AI, pulling away from the global south. We have to do something about that because at the moment it's getting worse, and so we're exacerbating these gaps rather than filling them. How may we facilitate a global conversation centering on collaboration and equity? I think that's what you're doing by having these conversations about artificial intelligence, by being part of a shaper community. But it's hard, and you need to not only have the conversation, but you need to have your voice heard. So get involved and make sure that you are being involved in your local business community, your local government, and it could be a local government. You don't have to say, oh, I live in Kenya, and so I have to be involved with Kenyan policy at the national level. It might be that you live in Mombasa and you are involved in policy and education in that locality, because the global conversation can't be had until we're all on the same page about what AI is and what we can get from it and how we can maximize its benefits. So the second question you asked me is the importance of engaging next generation leaders and youth in developing technology as well as shaping policy. Well, you know by now, I'm going to say it's vitally important. If you want to create a world that you want, then just as you have to think about climate change, just as you have to be active in the climate change debate, you need to be active in the AI debate. You don't want to be one of those people who in 10 years' time turns around and says, oh dear, I should have participated, I could have made a change. And how may we support youth and engage them as key stakeholders? Well, mentorship is really important, so that we can mentor lots of people, and that means that we can bring lots of people into a conversation that they need to be part of, especially people who wouldn't otherwise find a way into that conversation. And there are a lot of sort of youth parliaments. UNICEF had a youth parliament project, and there are lots of youth clubs and things for youth around the world. And so I suggest you go and talk to them. It's the same as my go and talk to your local town. Make sure that it understands when it's using facial recognition technology, that this may not be the best thing for it to do. So it's look for how you can make a difference in your community, and then you can extend and make a difference globally. But unless we all know something about AI, we can't understand, and something about what we want out of the future, we can't then build the policy we need to achieve it. So I feel that I have truly lectured you. I apologize about that. As I said, I'm very passionate about this subject, and I hope that, any of you who want to will become part of the work that we're doing. Perhaps you could mentor a member of our youth council. Perhaps you could find more members for our youth council. So the future is yours, and it's a privilege for me to be able to help shape it with you. Thank you.